It's time for the beer radio you've been looking for. This is the show that dispels myths, tackles the toughest topics, and makes no apologies for geeking out on beer. Hosted by two guys that drink before they think. Jamil Zainasheff and John Palmer. This is Brew Strong.
Hey, howdy, hey, my brewing brothers and sisters. Welcome to another episode of Brew Strong. Today, my guest is Scott Janish. And you may have heard of him from scottjanish.com, where he's been blogging and experimenting about hops and hoppy beers and providing a ton of great information to us all about hops through his really great book, The New IPA. It's all about really the modern techniques that everybody's using to get ultra hoppy beers, whether they be the more bitter, dry West Coast style or the more juicy East Coast, New England style. He's got a ton of information on it. It's been really, really useful. It's one of my most recent favorite books that I've come across. Scott, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, first of all, it's cool to hear you say that. I mean, I've been a longtime fan of yours, both as a writer and as a podcaster. So it's cool to hear that you even know of the book, and it's a thrill to be on your podcast. But a little bit about myself. Let's see. I mean, I'm been beer blogging for probably about 5 or 6 years. Mostly focused on looking into the academic papers out there. There's this huge world of beer research that I think largely goes unnoticed a lot of times. And so once I stumbled across that, I was just kind of hooked and started really reading through academic papers to see, to inspire new brewing ideas or things to test, or and started writing blog posts to kind of like summarize what I would come across and read in these papers, and then usually try to brew a batch or something to test out the research. And so that progression of writing eventually led to working on the book, which eventually led to me meeting and becoming good friends with Michael Tomsmeyer, who is now my business partner at Sapwood Cellars in Columbia, Maryland. I went over to his house. We're both in the DC area to talk about getting his opinions on writing a book. Is it worth it? Should I even go down this route? We decided we should probably just start a brewery. So in a lot of ways, so
you made lots of bad decisions, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that was that night was 2 years of writing a book, and now at least 7 years of a lease. So, yeah, maybe it was a bad decision.
Well, I tell people that want to open breweries, write books. It's like, well, it's a ton of work, doesn't really pay, and then you feel good about it anyways. If you enjoy doing it, then it doesn't matter what you're getting paid.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And for me, it was part of the book. The back part of it was just, I was going around the country interviewing, brewers that I really respected and looked up to, and they would tell me their whole process and let me document it. And so, that was fun to include in the book, but it helped, Mike and I, as we're starting a brewery,
Yeah, I noticed you never stopped by here and asked me, only the brewers you respected. Yes, I understand. I
didn't say only.
I understand.
So that, you're right. I mean, it's a lot of work to do a book. For me, it took about 2 years, and it was mostly on free time. And then also at the same time, I'm trying to start up the brewery. So that slowed things down quite a bit, but eventually just had to get it out there and publish it and say it's good enough. I actually was trying to get it published through brewing publications, but they decided not to go through with it. And since I was already so far along, I was like, screw it. I'm just gonna.
They passed on a good one. I mean, I think everybody's getting that book, and everybody should. Do I have my copy here? I don't have my copy here. It must be at home.
So the nerve-wracking thing is when you're doing interviews, and maybe you went through this too, like some people like read a specific part of the book and you're like, God, I wrote that 2 years ago, man. I don't remember.
Right. No, people will ask me, they're like, so, this sentence here, And it's like, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I guess I wrote it. I'm not sure what it means now.
Almost
You
paranoid. I
know,
like read my own book before I interview.
right? There's been a lot of pints since I wrote that.
Yeah.
Well, and I think you're getting close to needing to do a second book here, a version two, with all the new information that's coming out about hops and all the new great information you're put on your website. Everybody should have bookmarked scottjanish.com for the if you're interested in hops and using hops, because you just keep piling on good information after good information. Seriously, I have your site bookmarked. I thought one of your neat things you got on there is like a database of the hop oils, hop compounds, and you can kind of sort by which hop has the most of each kind of compound. I found that really useful and interesting, as I'm trying to select hops for something or trying to dial in a beer to get certain flavors. So I thought that was really useful.
I'd love to expand that at some point if I can get my hands on more, because when I put that together, really the focus was on only a handful of compounds, but now more and more, research gets put into hoppy beers, in particular hazy hoppy beers. That was really never a thing before. So most of the research, only in the last couple of years, has there been a couple studies specifically on hazy IPAs. It's
right.
Most of the research that's in the book is really like trying to piece together things that might explain why hazy beers are hazy or ways to get more hop flavor in there. So you're right. I mean, every quarter there's usually some more papers put out on whether it's brewing science or master brewers, and so it's fun that hopefully brewers can keep kind of leading where they study, because that's a lot of these, I don't think a lot of them that are doing the research are actually brewers themselves. So it's good to have everyone kind of involved.
Right. Oh, I agree 100%. And one of the things on your website that really drew my attention and I found fascinating was one about the argument for cold dry hopping. I read through that and I thought, that's something that a lot of people should consider trying, or at least, they should read the information that you provided. First off, what is it exactly you mean by cold dry hopping?
Yeah, this is I tried to make a case for cold dry hopping in the post, not because I have any skin in the game in it, but it just seemed like all the different papers I was reading pointing towards there being benefits to cold or dry hopping. And so, typically, at least for myself, when I was homebrewing, I would usually just dry hop at the tail end of fermentation, and usually the last couple days or whatever fermentation, that's when you're at your highest temperature. So maybe
right.
68 to 72, 74 degrees, depending on your yeast or whatever, and that's when you dry hop. And so after doing some research and talking to other commercial brewers, I found out a lot of people were doing it at what they call soft crashing temperatures. So that's when you're dropping the tank to about 58 degrees.
58, 62, around in there. Right. That's what we were doing.
Get used to flock out a little bit, and then usually we try to get the yeast out of the beer and then dry hop.
Yeah.
So for me, cold dry hopping is anywhere from 40 degrees to 58 degrees.
Okay, 40 to 58.
Yeah, and there's we can kind of go through some of the reasons why we experiment with that. But the main thing is, why do you dry hop, right? You're just trying to get, the fruity compounds out of those hops through extraction. And so, if you can get, most of the research is pointing towards extraction happening pretty quick, especially on a small scale, and especially if you're agitating or recirculating the hops. And so if you're getting some papers, it's little as a few hours, 6 hours if you're recirculating, to 24 hours is generally seems like a safer target for me. And then I think the bigger scale, Peter Wolf has done a lot of research on this. And he seems to, the bigger the batches, the kind of slower that extraction might be. So, homebrewers might be getting it a day or two or even less, especially if you're agitating it and, the bigger the tank, maybe it goes down a couple of days. So,
well, I've always thought, the cylinder conical fermenters that we use are kind of a negative, because if the hops fall down into the bottom of that cone, you really only have the surface that's kind of active of the hops, unless you're recirculating. And same thing goes for yeast. You're really only getting activity from the top of the yeast. The rest of the cone of the yeast is getting nothing. Whereas a home brewer, the bottom of carboy is very flat and broad, and I think that helps. Plus, you can just kind of rock that carboy and stir up the hops, and and stir up the yeast and get more activity out of it. Could I ask you also to move a little closer to your mic? You're still a little soft.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
There you go. So I think there is a big difference between large and small breweries, and I've always thought home brewers have the advantage over commercial brewers. And the funny thing is, most home brewers, when you start, you think, oh, those commercial brewers, they got all the equipment, they got all that stuff, and it's like, you actually have an advantage. I'll tell you what. I want to talk about home brewing and who has the advantage and who gives people the advantage. It's my good friend John Blickman, BlickmanEngineering.com. John, have you ever met John Blickman?
I haven't.
Oh, you should.
That was a hell of a segue.
He's a sweetheart of a person. He's a brilliant engineer and just a brilliant mind. When it comes to discussing anything, he is just wonderful. So if you get a chance to meet him, you'll enjoy it. He is always making great equipment, and not just for home brewers, but for professional brewers now. If you need a small scale microbrewery, he's providing it as well. Again, the same attention to detail and quality that you're going to find in all the Blickman Engineering products. So check him out. He's been paying for the show for the past 12, 13, 14. I'm not sure what year it is, so I'm not sure how many years he's been paying for it. But he deserves you sending him an email at feedback@BlickmanEngineering.com. If you could do that for me and tell him how much you appreciate that he's still paying for the show, so you can listen to it for free, that would be greatly appreciated. Tell you what, we need to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about cold dry hopping. If you're listening live, stay tuned because it's like 5-second break, and if you're listening on the podcast, well, listen to our fine sponsors. We'll be back right after this.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Learning to brew has never been so disgusting. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back. We're talking about cold dry hopping with Scott Janisch, who is pretty much becoming a god of hop information on the web. All right, so we're talking about cold dry hopping. Why not colder than 40 degrees Fahrenheit?
I guess, I've never really, most of the papers don't ever even test below 38 degrees. I guess they just kind of figure that's around where, you're keeping your beer cold. And so that's just where they, stop most of the testing.
Really? See, what they should do is ask, because we crash everything down, below 32, around 30, 31 before we package. And so my thought on cold dry hopping was, well, let's go ahead and crash all the way down, do our dry hopping, harvest our yeast, do our dry hopping, and carbonate and be ready to go.
Up.
Yeah. And have
you tried it at that low of a temperature?
We've tried it, and it is not gone to centrifuge yet. But I told him I just texted my guy to bring me a sample so I can taste it right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
Right.
Yeah,
but
that a lot of times if I do like, so I'll do a lot of like, not really test batches, but we have a 10-barrel brew house and 20 and 10-barrel fermenters. And a lot of times I'll steal like 5 gallons. All of our homebrew equipment's at the brewery, and so we'll steal 5 gallons off the tank to do some like little test batches or whatever before we dry hop to try different hops or whatever the case. And whenever I've tried to dry hop in our cold room, so around 40 degrees or a little less, I do think like I'll have to agitate those more than I would if they're a little warmer. Almost that too cold, it seems like the hops are encouraged to drop a little quicker. So that's the only thing. If I was to go a little even colder than what we're doing now, I think I would consider agitating them more, whether that's just baking it. And if you're dry hopping in a keg or something as a home brewer, there's not really a concern if it's under pressure. You can just kind of pick up that keg and swirl it around. Yeah.
Turn it upside down. Yeah, we're recirculating, pump recirculating when we dry hop. We've
long duration, or is it like a 20-minute thing?
We go for full turn of the tank, which is about 3 hours.
Okay. Yeah,
I've heard that you don't want to go more than 4 hours. I don't know. I've heard all sorts of things, but that may be at warmer temperatures. At colder temperatures, you might need to recirculate longer or less. Hard to say. But when we started the Heretic, at that time, I was of the mind that with hoppy beers, dry hopping, you split it into like two doses, and you set it like 3 days apart, and your total time was about a week. And then I was like, well, let's do 3 doses, like 2 days apart, and it's a week. And then I went to, with all the stuff that came out about it, I went to, it sounds like my beer is coming now. I went to, like 3 doses, 1 day apart. So it was a total of 3 days. And then we went to just everything going in the tank and recirculating it.
It's interesting on the recirc. That's the one thing that, talking to Brew, it seems like there's the most split on. Those that are recircing or those that are just kind of burping from the bottom of the cone.
All right. So this beer I've been drinking, now I've got a cold dry hop version. It's come out across biscuity and less hoppy. I think it's missing hops. And this is the Yakima Classic Cascade. And this was done warm. That seems fine. All right. So interrupting the show. Yeah, we're live. We're live doing the show with Scott Janish from scottjanish.com. Yeah. I think you are encouraging us to do a lot more testing and experimentation. So one of the things we do is in the whirlpool, we try and select some hops at a cool whirlpool of like 175 hops that will produce a lot more linalool and geraniol. And the thought being we'll get more biotransformation during. So here's the thing that I don't think anyone really has the answer to, and maybe you don't either, but this makes perfect sense to me. For the longest time, people are talking about throwing in dry hops, when fermentation kicks off, X days into fermentation, while fermentation's raging, throw in your dry hops. Mm-hmm. In the side-by-side tests that I did on that, I got a tremendous bitterness that in triangle tests, nobody liked. And I was like, well, yeah, because you're exposing all this hop matter to, for a long time, it's being stirred up. It's like dry hopping for an entire week and stirring it up. And that's not good. what is it that biotransformation is supposed to do? It's supposed to convert these certain compounds via certain yeast pathways into other compounds. Well, if I throw those hops in the whirlpool, those compounds are transferring into the wort and are carried over into fermentation. They're not gone.
Right.
Why can't I just, if I'm looking for biotransformation, why can't I add those hops in the whirlpool and then not have the vegetable matter into the beer? And I avoid that weird, nasty bitterness, and I get biotransformation after all. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think that's kind of how I look at it too. And I think most of the research that looks at there's a couple different ways you get biotransformation, but the one that we know that Saccharomyces ale strain is actually doing is some of the geraniol conversions, beta citronellol, for example, and that's happening. That's been tested within the first couple days of fermentation. So if you're cooling your whirlpool down, I believe one paper was looking at about around 180 is where you kind of have the most retention of some of these fruitier compounds that you're after in a hoppy beer.
Uh-huh.
If you're doing that around 180, you should be retaining some of those in the whirlpool, and they should be going into your fermenter, and those are the compounds that are likely biotransformized. It's hard to say.
Biotransformated.
Yeah. So if you're dry hopping like day 5, there's still active fermentation, but I think the time has come and gone for when that was going to be converted. And so, just like you said, I think you're probably just adding more green vegetal material to the beer. And I say this all the time, but my biggest complaint with hazy IPAs is a lot of times they're just they can come across really astringent and green.
Yes.
Very, very vegetal.
Yes.
And I think that has a lot to do with just not enough hot side hopping in a lot of these beers. You kind of need to, you not just the IBUs from the hot side, but you need to mix in as much, complex compounds as you can to sort of balance that, because, heavy dry hopping does more than just, add, fruity compounds, but you're adding a lot more green, polyphenol-like compounds. And that's kind of where, the shorter durations and cooler temperatures come into play, where, polyphenols, for example, are, in studies where they look at, if you increase the polyphenol content, what does that do to the beer? And tasting panels, rate it as being more astringent and harsh. So, polyphenols typically are peaking during a dry hop around days like 3. And the warmer you dry hop, the more polyphenol pickup you're going to get. And so that's another sort of, win, I guess, score 1 for the column of a shorter, cooler dry hop is a little less polyphenol pickup. And the same goes for, myrcene is a hydrocarbon, but that's another one that just actually last year, there was a paper that came out that tested that at warmer temperatures. And the warmer you're dry hopping a beer, the more of myrcene you're getting into the beer, which can actually mask some of those fruitier flavors, because myrcene is, one of the highest compounds of hops. In terms of the total oil, it's up there as the highest percentage.
Right.
And that's a green kind of resinous character that can get in the way of some of the fruitier compounds. And this is especially true for hazy IPAs. One of the papers that was actually looked at, studied a bunch of commercial hazy IPAs, found that the viscous nature of the beer. So, they're higher beta glucan, they're higher protein. They're actually able to retain some of these otherwise more volatile hydrocarbons. So you just think of it being it's thick, and so it's not getting out of the solution as well. And this is especially true if you're doing post-fermentation dry hopping, where there's no active CO2 that would push those volatile compounds.
No scrubbing. Yeah.
So a West Coast IPA is going to have a lot less myrcene than a New England IPA. If you're trying to keep that down a little bit to have more of an intense fruit-forward tropical citrus thing, it makes sense to experiment with cooler dry hop temperatures, because that's going to give you less polyphenols as well as less myrcene, and you're still retaining the thiols and monoterpene alcohols that you're after.
Well, in your blog post, I mean, it's almost offensive to call it a blog post. It's more of an article. In the article you wrote, you mentioned the effect on hop creep and head retention. And how is that affected by cold dry hopping versus warm dry hopping?
Yeah, head retention is the papers I looked at, it found that the longer that the hops were in contact with the beer, so more days that they were sitting in the beer, the head retention went down. So the longer contact time, the worse the head retention. And then separate papers found that alpha acids can contribute to a more stable head, and it's actually more efficient when they were dosing alpha acids into beer at cooler temperatures than warmer at keeping the head around longer. So again, cooler temperatures might help with head retention. It might help keep those fruitier flavors intact.
Mm-hmm. And what about hop creep? I think hop creep was mentioned in that article as well.
Yeah, hop creep's an interesting one because I guess that that's been around. They're finding way back when they're putting hops in casks, they would find hop creep, and then it just kind of disappeared. I think it was maybe a little bit of how brewers are using hops now, and maybe how hop suppliers are, how they're being pelletized, trying to keep temperatures down during the process, which may be keeping some of these enzymes alive in the hops. So that's, hop creep is essentially, I think it's easy to think about if you think, hazy IPAs have a lot of dextrins, which are unfermentable sugars, and hops themselves, they found have enzymes that are breaking down these dextrins into fermentable sugars. And so if you don't have yeast in your beer, or you say you crashed it out and there's always a little yeast in there, and if it starts fermenting those now freed up sugars, it could be, an unhealthy fermentation that could, lead to diacetyl. And so what recent papers have found is if you're dry hopping cooler, you're going to have, the enzymes are less active. And if you're doing shorter durations, you're also getting less of the impact. So shorter durations and colder temperatures might help with, less hop creep happening, less the hops from the enzymes from the hops actually, breaking down sugars. And so that's, as a home brewer, I don't think you really need to worry about hop creep. At least I never did, especially if you're, if you're kegging these beers and you're keeping them cold, I don't think you're going to see much of an impact. But, maybe it's more important for professional brewers that have cans that might be sitting warm.
Right. Yeah, the whole difference between commercial and homebrew, you're struggling because you've got to package a product that sits warm on a shelf somewhere, cold if you're lucky, and a lot of the vast majority of consumers are not somebody who's homebrewed, not somebody who's familiar with brewing. You really have to make sure that it's perfect for the average person. We think a lot about people who are geeky about craft beer and people who are home brewers, and we make some assumptions, but oh my God, that's not the case in commercial. And so in homebrew, you're so free to do so much. I wish I could go back to a much smaller scale and not sell beer. But see, that's how it goes.
I think earlier saying you think home brewers have an advantage, and I think they do in a lot of ways. But the one area I think I would disagree on that is with oxygen. I think as a professional brewer, it's so much easier to control. Actually, professional. I always think that's weird too. Is if you open a brewery, all of a sudden you're
a professional.
Pro. Yeah, like no other sport can you just name yourself a pro.
I tell people I'm still a home brewer. I just brew bigger batches and I have a license to sell it. I haven't really
it doesn't feel any
changed.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Oh, I'm not sure I agree with you on oxygen because you're talking about occluding oxygen from your process.
Yeah, it's just it depends on your equipment mainly, but as a home brewer, let's say we have like a dry hop port that we dry hop. It's called a dry hopper, I think. Really, it's essentially another vessel that sits on top of your tank that's attached to a 4-inch valve.
Right, and you load your hops, you purge it with CO2, and then you open the port and let the hops in that way.
Yeah, exactly. It's a closed way to do it. But a lot of brewers, pro brewers are just spraying CO2 through their spray ball and just opening up that 4-inch hop and dumping them in. And I
can have John Blickman make this for home brewers. It'll probably be ready next week. Go to blickmanengineering.com to check it out today.
You should, because I think that's
right.
Because if you're opening up, say you have a 20-barrel tank and you're opening up a 4-inch port and you're dumping in those hops, so you have 600 plus gallons of beer exposed to this, whatever oxygen right around that port. Well, if you're fermenting in a bucket and you open up that bucket and dump in the hops, well, you have more exposure to oxygen and you have less beer to dilute it, if that makes sense. So I think that's one of the biggest areas.
I would say one thing though, about dry hopping at warmer temperatures while fermentation is still, there's quite a bit of yeast and maybe at the very tail end of fermentation. Active yeast will take up oxygen very quickly. So, that may be less of an issue, when you're warm dry hopping then.
Yeah. If you time it right. Yeah. And there's still a little bit of activity going on. And some brewers even add a little bit of sugar with their last dry hop just to, encourage a little quick re-fermentation, just
really?
For oxygen. That's not something I've ever really done. I guess, if I was homebrewing these same beers that we're doing at Sapwood now, I would probably do 2 doses. Like you were saying, you break up most of your dry hops into, separate charges. And there's some research that shows you get better extraction efficiency in smaller charges. So that makes sense. And then, so I would probably dry hop with like a day or 2 left in fermentation for part of it. And then I would try to dry hop in a keg or something that I can purge post fermentation. That are metabisulfite. If I was a home brewer, I would point towards Marshall's experiments over at Brewlosophy, where they're adding, 0.2 grams or something in some of their hoppy beers, and you can not only, they taste the difference, but you can just see the oxidation difference in the 2 beers. So that's so that huge advantage to home brewers in terms of doing weird fun stuff, because you don't need 500 pounds of a weird fruit or something, but oxygen is the one that I've even tasted in a lot of home brews too, that I just think is the hardest thing to control.
Well, I'd say it is one of the most common flaws in a lot of homebrewed beers is an oxidation problem, right?
Yeah,
I think that it could be controlled, but people don't. I think that's maybe the biggest issue. All right, we need to take another short little break. If you're listening live, stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.
Back to the 2 guys that know how to turn beer into beer. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back. We're talking with Scott Janisch, famous author from the new IPA book that everybody has. Or if you don't have it, you should be buying it. I think I bought mine off of Amazon.
Yeah, I think it's the only place you can get it.
And it was relatively cheap. Came quite quick, and it's a good read when you're locked away pandemic-wise. If you're interested in hoppy beers, I highly recommend it. I also highly recommend our new sponsor, Brew Chatter. These guys are up in Sparks, Nevada, which is right next to Reno. You can call it Reno, but technically it's Sparks. Great folks. They got a beautiful shop with tons of really fresh ingredients. They even have a little bar in there where they have always great beers. You go in, you can enjoy a pint while you're shopping for your homebrew gear. They have an online presence as well, brewchatter.com. Check them out. Good people, great ingredients, great knowledge, really fun guys, well worth checking out. brewchatter.com. All right, so we're talking about cold dry hopping. One question I had for you is, would you determine cold dry hopping is appropriate on certain styles and not others? For example, would you cold dry hop a continental lager? Would you dry hop a juicy beer? Would you dry hop more piney West Coast beer, or would you change your temperatures based off of what kind of beer you are trying to make?
That's a good question. I guess I would. If I was after more of a green resinous thing, I would consider doing it a little warmer. But usually if you're getting full extraction of the hop at 58 or 40 degrees, you're getting a pretty good profile specific taste or aroma or whatever you're after from a hop. If you're getting full extraction at the lower temperatures, it just seems like I would just keep doing that. I don't know if I would change it for certain styles. I'm actually experimenting now with I got there's a paper that came out about a lager strain. So Tum 35 is the strain. Tum 34 is the 3470 that pretty much everyone uses. And this Tum 35 was one that was really popular, I believe, in like the late 40s, and then just kind of disappeared. And they just found it again frozen on something. I'm not sure how that worked. And wrote a paper on it, and they sent me a little sample from Germany to test out. And I'm excited about it because it's a low sulfur producing lager strain. So that I think that sulfur thing gets in the way of hops a little bit. And there's research that shows the cooler you're fermenting, you might actually retain more hop compounds, particularly thiols. And so I'm testing out like the fermenting at 52 with this strain, and just trying to really push some of the hop thiols in like an Indian pale lager, essentially. So in that case, I'm trying to dry hop and ferment cool, all for the purposes of retaining more of the fruitier compounds. But so we'll see how that goes. I'll probably keg it in about a week.
Well, it's interesting if you're trying to make a lager and you're trying to retain more fruity compounds. I mean, traditionally, lagers, you didn't want any fruity compounds. You want it all to be more herbal, floral, right? Yeah.
And that can clash a little bit with some of the New England style hops. I think a little bit you're going more on that citrus tropical side, or at least I am trying to do that. And that's what we've found consumers like too. You give them a sweet beer that's really tropical and citrusy, and it usually goes over pretty well. And so I like a lot of these hoppy beers to finish sweeter too. So I don't want this lager strain to ferment out below. Honestly, like 10-20 is kind of a sweet spot for a lot of final gravities for hoppy beers for us.
Wow.
That's it's not good for the calorie intake, but I think it offsets some of the harshness you can get a little more.
You got to put up with the winters that you guys have here in California. Everything's got to be, one Plato, maybe two max for finishing gravities. We don't, somebody was asking me the other day, they're just like, well, what is your, juicier than now beer, finish at? And I'm just like, they're like, it must be, 10-24, 10-30. I'm like, no, it's probably below 10-10. They're like, no, it isn't. I pulled up the brew sheet. I'm like, yeah, it's like, 10-6, 10-8.
Yeah, some yeast strains just seem to do a better job at faking their final gravity too. Whether it's like
right
or what, that it still has like a full soft mouthfeel, but it finishes drier.
Well, and I think for us, especially West Coast, it's got to be a drier overall attenuation. But yeah, we get full mouthfeel, we get the sweetness, all that stuff. So it just depends. Depends on that's the beauty of beer. You really should make whatever thing it is that people want to drink.
We actually today we had a pale ale finish at 10:15, and we shot 50 pounds of maltodextrin in there to bring it up a little bit.
And
it's that post-firm doctoring of beers is something I don't think a lot of people do or consider, but it's can be pretty beneficial if you know what you're after anyways.
Right. One of my favorite additions is lactose. A little more sweeter than maltodextrin, just a little more, oomph. I think, that in itself can be a real boon to getting that balance. Because like you're saying, people like sweet and fruity. I mean, that's, I guess it's, I'm old. I don't know if you know this by my appearance because I look very youthful. Yeah, however, I'm old. And, the kids these days that we've raised, we raised them on a lot of gummy worms and, other candies. Which,
so make your beer taste like that, right?
So we're making our beer taste like that. Exactly. That is exactly the point.
Mike actually, he made me do a dollar store challenge where we had to go to the dollar store and he did like a YouTube video of it where we had $10 each and we had to make a variant of 5 gallons of beer, but we had to buy the ingredients at the dollar store.
Nice.
And that's pretty much what we did is we just did make candy beers.
One of my daughters, she loves the dollar store, but especially when we go to like England, it's the pound store. When we go to somewhere in Europe, it's the Euro store. And when we go to Japan, it's like the 100 yen store. And so every country we've been to, she's gone to the equivalent dollar store. And it's just so cool that exists around the world. It's not just a U.S. thing.
And it's amazing what you can get for $1.
Yeah, exactly.
I haven't been in one in so long. Like I need to actually just like make this part of my weekly trip.
All right. Imagine what you could build, what brewery you could build from here's the challenge. Build a brewery from scratch from the dollar store. That would be something. We gotta
don't put a whole bunch of jumbo or Mr. Freezy things in a Berliner.
Didn't work.
I lost the challenge.
You lost. What was the winning ingredient?
Let's see. Mike did mango juice and like a fake, or it was like a vanilla extract type thing that smelled.
Oh, like come on! He went the easy route.
Yeah, he swept me. We used Untapped as the determine the winner.
Ah, damn it! Well, there you go. Zachary asks, is there a risk for hop creep if you're dry hopping at very cold temperature? I would imagine it wouldn't be fully shelf stable after a cold dry hop.
I mean, if you're dry hopping cooler, I think your risk of hop creep goes down. So I think you'd be safer in that way. Okay.
Are there hops that favor cold dry hopping versus warm dry hopping? Is there some hops that you really think are advantageous at one temperature or the other?
No, not that really comes to mind. I guess this is a way to avoid the question a little bit, but there's a recent paper that I was just reading that was looking at other impacts that other variables a hop has and how well it extracts. And they found that the higher the alpha acid of a hop, the poorer it extracted. Almost like the alpha acid itself was making it more difficult to get those compounds out of the hop pellet.
Uh-huh.
And so potentially higher alpha maybe could have a warmer temperature. Higher alpha hops usually have fewer polyphenols. And so if you have fewer polyphenols and you're going a little warmer, you might be safe in that regard too.
Is it fewer polyphenols per alpha acid unit, or is it fewer polyphenols per weight of hops?
It's more of I think it was a German study of German hops where they just essentially found a high correlation between high alpha and low polyphenol, and the low alpha acid hops had higher polyphenols on average. So I'm sure there's outliers with certain varieties, but that's just kind of one of the only sources that I've seen that looked at it like that. But I actually emailed this author. I believe he was in Germany, because what struck me with that is, a lot of the, I don't know if you use cryo hops at all in your dry hops.
We haven't been. I mean, we considered it as just, the cost and the change to our process. Every process change we do, we have to test first. And, a lot of it is, hey, your next year's crop, we'll convert it for you. You'll have half as much and it'll all be cryo. We're like, hey, wait, hold on. We need to test first. So
that's kind of the fun part of being like, we're still pretty small, that with, batch to batch, it really doesn't matter. We hardly ever making the same beers more than 3 or 4 times. So we can kind of experiment on the fly a little more, but we use cryo quite a bit, almost only on dry hopping though. And we don't use them at half the rate. I haven't found that to really be the case. That's more of a hot side thing, I think.
What rate are you using it? More like
just as if it were a T90 pellet. So most of our IPAs are getting dry hopped about 4.4 pounds a barrel. And so it's probably around 10 ounces or so, I think, for home brewers.
So that's quite a bit.
Yeah, it's quite a bit. But what I was interested in is like, well, okay, if you're getting less extraction with higher alpha acid hops, that's the whole point of cryo, is they're like twice as much alpha acid. So I emailed the author. I was like, so what's your opinion on cryo? Like, are we getting even fewer, there's a lot more oils in there, but are we having a hard time getting them out? Because even at the full rate, so, whether it's like some of my favorite beers are taking, doing all mosaic, doing half of it in cryo and half of it in normal pellet. You just build in a little complexity there that I really, really enjoy. And so he actually responded, and he was cool. And he was just like, something I might want to test down the road, but he thinks that, the higher alpha cryos might benefit from more either recirculation or multiple burps from the tank to try to get more of the extraction.
Well, and there's, talk going around about kind of the maximum dry hops that are usable, that past a certain point, you're just throwing hops in and not getting anything out.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you jump into a lake, you're wet, you're not going to get any wetter if you stay in longer, right?
Exactly.
But I've looked at those studies, and it's interesting. And the one that comes to mind, I think it was a Thomas Shellhammer study, and he did Cascade hops. And when they used them in higher amounts, I don't remember the exact amounts, you started to lose this, citrusy thing from Cascade, and it started to get a little more herbal and aggressive, which kind of makes sense. If you're just throwing more and more vegetal material in the beer, it's gonna change it a little bit.
Right.
And I don't remember what that saturation point was, but it was pretty low. And I just found, at the brewery, if we were to dry hop at those amounts, I don't think we'd get the same results. So maybe it's more of a variety specific variable.
Yeah, it's hard to say. We're over what that limit was. So I don't know that we want to go lower, but if we could go just a tiny bit lower, it saves an amazing amount of hops. All right, our last short, quick break. We'll be back right after this.
Back to the beer guys that make other beer guys look like wine guys. Brew strong.
All right, we're back. We're talking with Scott Janish, scottjanish.com, and the Sapwood Cellars out in Maryland. Next time I'm out in Maryland, I got to stop by.
You definitely should. We should brew something.
I think so. I think it'd be a blast. I like you. I like your information. We should get together. Let's see. Couple more questions. Let's see here. Richard asks, what temp should you cold dry hop? I know you said 40 to 58, but
Yeah, I'm just on, I don't have like, with a lot of this stuff, the research just kind of points for things to try. I mean, I don't have like the best way or best method to do any of this, but I can just tell you what we do.
Don't lie to us and hide your best method.
We do it everything at 50. We start at 58. So we'll start our first dose at 58. A lot of times if it's a double IPA and we're doing, 2 rounds of dry hopping, we'll do a burp every day for 2 or 3 days. And then I'll drop the tank another 4 or 5 degrees. And that kind of helps. I want to get that first dose out. And so drop that tank 5 degrees, and I'm hoping that it encourages the hops to kind of settle out in the cone, and then I can drop them before adding the next dose. So that means the second dose of hops is usually around 54 degrees.
Okay. And you don't do any recirculation?
We've only tried it once. It didn't seem to, we need to do something like that over and over again. I'm worried about with our pump, oxygen kind of getting in.
Right.
During the recirc. But we normally just do blast through the bottom of the cone. So 20, 25 PSI, depending on how big the tank is, you sometimes have to increase it a little bit.
Now, are you worried about blasting CO2 through the bottom of the cone and then, because you got to bleed that off, ending up, burping off too much of the aromatic compounds? Because that's how we used to do it as well. And we worried that you can smell a lot of hops coming out. And
so we're always doing this with the tank under pressure. And we're always trying to keep the head pressure on the beer higher than any sort of carbonation in the beer.
Okay.
The idea is you're
just doing a tiny burp kind of thing.
Yeah. And so we'll we're not too concerned if we'll eventually have to bleed the tank down a little bit because, carbing it might get up to like 15 PSI or something. And then we'll bleed it down to like 10 or whatever. So we'll have to bleed off a little bit. But I'm not too concerned with a lot of head pressure in there. And so if anything builds up from the burps, it's not too much of a concern. But I am always worried about losing volatiles. And that's why I'm a big fan of most post-fermentation dry hopping being done with head pressure on.
Okay. The always gorgeous Bevo is monitoring the comments on our live Zoom here on Facebook. And she is send those over to me. And she says, let's see, Gino is asking, what is the typical final gravity for a hazy IPA and West Coast-ish IPA at Sapwood and at Heretic? I want us to compare sizes here.
That's what it sounds like. You know what? We've done a whopping total of 1 West Coast IPA in 2 years. And honestly, it looked more like a hazy IPA when we're all said and done. So we didn't do a very good job of clearing it up. And I would assume that beer was probably around a 10-12, 10-15 final.
Yeah.
But most of our pale ales are around 10, 18, 10, 20. And our double IPAs are probably 10, 20 to 10, 25.
Well, there's nothing wrong with higher finishing gravity or lower finishing gravity. What matters is that you've fully attenuated the beer, that you have fully fermented the beer. And if you have, the finishing gravity is the finishing gravity. And it is made up of a lot of things that add body or, character to the beer. It does not mean that it's somehow unfinished. Now, there are unfinished beers where you mashed at a temperature for high fermentability, you added dextrose, you did all this stuff, and you ended up at 1030. That's probably a poorly fermented beer. So what Scott and I are talking about are kind of two different things. He's targeting more of the residual dextrins that are not sweet, that he's fully fermented the beer out. What we do here at Heretic on the West Coast, he's East Coast or West Coast. The West Coast, you got to master the ultra dry, crisp, hoppy IPA. And so, we'll do a double IPA like our Evil Cousin, and that'll finish out around 10:06, 10:08, Plato and a half, 2 Plato. At one point, we got it down to 1 Plato, and I bumped it back up to, Plato and a half, 2 Plato. But a lot of our hazies, we'll try and get, 2 Plato, maybe 3 Plato, so 10:08, 10:12. Just depends. And then, again, there's a lot of factors that go into it, but the most important thing is, regardless of what your finishing gravity is not, it did show on this just recently, that does not determine sweetness. That does not determine a lot of things. It determines the finishing gravity. So most important thing is that you're fully fermenting. Let's see here. Tom asks, do 1 ounce per 5 gallons on 3 days dry hops? Oh, I do 1 ounce per 5 gallon for 3 days dry hopping. What would you change? This is Galaxy hops at 60 degrees fermentation.
That's 1 ounce total in 5 gallons?
It sounds like he's doing 1 ounce 3 times on. Okay. Or on it may be on the 3rd day, or it may be, I don't know.
Well,
all right, 1 ounce on 5 gallons, 3 days in a row, dry hopping.
1 ounce, 3 days in a row. I think that if you are adding on multiple days on the homebrew scale, you just have to have a good way, especially if you're doing that post-firm, kind of like what I was
worried about oxygen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would, hopefully you're doing that in a closed manner, or you have a way to purge the headspace of it. But depending on the beer and what you're after, 3 total ounces is fairly low, I would think, for a dry hop beer. I think I'm around at least 5 total for 5 gallons, and going closer to 10 for double IPAs.
Woo!
The higher gravities really seem to be able to, or the higher alcohol really seem to help. You can throw more hops at a bigger beer.
Well, and also I think, a lot of any of the residuals seem to mask some of the hop character, sugars, all this stuff, and crystal malts especially masks that hop character, and it'd be nice to be able to get rid of that. Let's see here. We got a couple minutes left. Cole Melby, your local homebrew shop is an invaluable source for help with hop choice and dry hop timing, or any homebrew questions in general. I personally use Brew Chatter, and they're awesome to work with. They are. Those guys are amazing. They run a great homebrew shop. Ricky asks, what is your favorite Whirlpool hops besides Idaho 7?
Should we save that for the next show? That's kind of the topic conversation.
Right. Ricky, you're just going to have to listen in to the next show, which is coming in just a minute. We actually have run long on this one. Julius asks, what's your experiences with biotransformation and Quebec? Thinking homebrew, Imperial, A37, POG, etc.
Yeah, funny, I get asked that quite a bit, and I don't have a great answer for people. I've used some of those strains only a handful of times, and I haven't always loved the mix of the fermentation profile of those beers with hops. To me, it can clash a little bit. But I just haven't given all the strains a good run to see what I really like or don't like about them. And there really hasn't been any papers that I've seen specifically on those and their ability to convert compounds, because to do that, they have to be producers of certain enzymes that can either free compounds or convert compounds. And to my knowledge, they just haven't been tested yet.
That's for biotransfogulation. Yes.
I think it's a made-up word, yeah.
Well, for more made-up words, make sure to check out my fine sponsor, BlickmanEngineering.com. John Blickman, he is innovating your brew day and making great brew equipment that you should check out. You don't have to spend any money, but I would urge you to go to BlickmanEngineering.com, peruse the amazing things and the homebrew dry hop charger thing that Scott talked about. It's already made. It's already patented and ready to go. If I know John Blickman, and email him at feedback@blickmanengineering.com and tell dear John how much I love him, that he has supported the show for so long. He's a great friend of the show. And our best wishes go out to John Palmer and his family. They're experiencing a loss of his father. So that's why he can't be with us. He would love to be with us, but he's got a lot to deal with right now. So Scott and I are holding down the fort, as it may be. All right. That's it for this episode. Hey, if you're listening live, stay tuned. In like 2 seconds, we're going to be live again with the next episode with Scott, and we're going to talk about survivables, which I think is a cool thing to talk about in hops. So until then, brew strong, everyone.